Welcome to the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm your host, Robin L. Owens, PhD, and this is where we dive in each week to give advice, tools, and tips for high-achieving women who have written books that make a difference for people while at work. I am a professor, and when I'm not doing that, I am speaking, writing, coaching, and teaching high-achieving women who have written books how to make a bigger difference, have more impact, and more purpose with their books. Okay, let's dive in. Before we get started with the episode, I want to ask you a question. Is your book ready to be turned into a successful online course? That's a question so many people have asked me. And so I decided to create a free resource to answer that very question. I took the time-tested process that I use for turning books into successful online courses, and I created a checklist that you can review and check off so you know the ways in which your book can be turned into a successful online course. So just head on over to createmasterfulcourses.com, createmasterfulcourses.com, and get your free checklist there. All right, now let's get to the episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. So glad you're here and listening to the podcast. I really appreciate you. I say it all the time because I mean it all the time. Really appreciate you. And because you've been listening, you helped us get ranked in the top 5% of all podcasts globally, according to Listen Notes, the podcast search engine. So I really appreciate you. And if you would do one more thing, I greatly appreciate that. Go ahead and rate, review, subscribe to the podcast. It'll help us keep it going. All right. Now, today I am with Reenita Hora. Now, let me tell you about Reenita. She is the founder who has built Ayoma, a health and wellness brand, and has written 7 books. That's right. You heard it. 7 books. 5 nonfiction and 2 fiction. And who knows, maybe some more are on the way. All right. She has contributed to The Hindu, South China Morning Post, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, CNN, Asian Investor, Times of India. Oh my gosh, National Geographic, so much more. And she is a founder, executive level content, operations and marketing leader. And as you can tell, a prolific writer with experience across industries, including media, entertainment, communications, tech, wellness in the US and Asia. She grows organizations ranging from early stage startups through mid-sized business, all through storytelling, creative marketing, and business strategy. And if that wasn't enough, she's a limited partner in the How Women Invest Fund, which specifically invests in women-owned companies. Welcome, Reenita Hora.
Thank you, Dr. Robin. It is so great to be on your podcast. I am humbled, not just by you, but the fact that your podcast is in the top 5%. I mean, oh gosh, what an honor. Thank you.
Thank you for saying that. I'm so glad you're here. Now, let's just jump right in. You heard me read your official intro bio. Why don't you tell us in your own words about you and the work you do?
Oh, goodness. It is wide and varied and has been through a series of evolution. I am first and foremost a writer. I have been a writer all my life and through all aspects and facets of my career. So what that means is I've worked for companies, I have my own company, I've done consulting work, I've done freelance work. I mean, it literally runs the gamut. But the one thing that is consistent in all of those stages along the way is writing. And most recently, I ran marketing and communications for SRI International, which is Silicon Valley's pioneer science research institute. They invented Siri, amongst several other things. They also partly invented the internet itself, along with UCLA and a few others along the way. This was a while ago, but still. So storytelling, writing and storytelling really has been my forte. And like I said, the one consistent thread through all of my incarnations of job and career along the way. And recently I left working for other folks, be it corporate job, day job. I still do consulting work though, to focus on my own IP, i.e. the business of writing. And that takes shape in the form of books, certainly in the form of screenplays, in the form of audio scripts, and my various consulting work. So hopefully that makes some sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it says to me that writing is central to you, and you have many ways to express this passion. I'm guessing it's a passion. Writing is a passion for you.
It is my saving grace.
All right. So you have 5 nonfiction books and 2 fictions. All right. So we primarily talk about fiction books here. I mean, nonfiction books here. You could say a word or two, but let's zero in on maybe one, maybe your most recent nonfiction book as a kind of a point of departure. Would that work for you?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. All right. So tell us the title of the book and then the premise.
So my most recent nonfiction book is a departure from all of my other nonfiction books, and I would say even from my fiction books. It's called Ace of Blades, and it is the memoir of my late father, Reenita Malhotra, who passed away 2.5 years ago. He was, if you've seen the TV show Succession, if you know what I'm talking about, the central character, Logan Roy, is my father. I don't know about Rupert Murdoch or whoever else it is reportedly based upon, but it's definitely my father. And in the early days of the show, when I watched season 1, my father was still around, and I tried my best to get him to watch it. Unfortunately, his health was declining and it didn't quite work out. But my father, suffice it to say, was a very dynamic character, complete genius and completely bipolar. So the opposite side of all that, misogynistic, brilliant, awful, and built with his own 2 hands. Literally, that's the only way I can say it. One of India's most important, forget businesses, but industries. Yeah, industries. Post-independence, India gained independence from the British colony in 1947. And in the 50s is when he started building this business for his family. He was a very young man. And he spent 60 years of his life at this. And the product and the business, and frankly, the industry, because they paved the way for the others to come in, was razor blades, think Gillette shaving products. Just a quick segue, back in the 50s, or around the time of independence, there wasn't much of homegrown industry. And certainly when it came to consumer products. So the consumer products that you saw were mostly imports from abroad. I'm generalizing, but mostly. Mm-hmm. And this was a time that the new post-independence government really wanted to grow industry. They wanted to have a handle on big sector industries, iron, steel, water, those kinds of things. But they didn't really know how to deal with consumer products. So they gave incentives to entrepreneurs to build private businesses, but they still tried to keep a check on them by granting licenses. So licenses for manufacture, license, and they would keep limits, on those licenses. That's the way they wanted to keep them in check. So it was difficult, suffice it to say. But my father, like I said, built homegrown brands like Bharat was the first family brand, then Topaz, then Supermax. These are the 3 most distinct brands from 1950 to 2010. And until the time that the business was sold off to a private equity group. And why I think this is such an important story is because the double-edged razor, the traditional barber razor, really is the coming of age product for any young man. What does a young man do when he comes of age? It's his first shave, right? He starts shaving. And this business, this industry was a coming of age story for every young man who shaved with those products, for my father himself building this business for his family. So for my family, it really sort of put the Malhotras sort of on the planet, on the Indian planet, if you will, and for India as a whole. Because this, like I said, this industry never existed before. And once the other players came in, I mean, there were years that Gillette was negotiating to buy out the business, and my father and his family members, sort of these staunch Indian entrepreneurs, like, no way, there's no way we're selling our baby, and etc. So Ace of Blades is his story. It is nonfiction, but unlike my previous nonfiction books, which are all DIY self-help, mostly in the wellness or personal finance subgenres, this one is quite different. This is literary nonfiction. It reads like fiction, but it is nonfiction. One of the publishers who was interested in acquiring it said, "Oh my gosh, this reads like a Bollywood story." And I'm like, "You don't know my family."
Well, it sounds like your father was a very important person in your life, and it was an honor for you to get his story out there. And you talk about him and include the complexity of his own humanity.
Absolutely. It's the complexity of his own humanity, and also how that has affected me, because although this is his memoir, the narrative is woven through a conversation I had with him between father and daughter. This was actually the last time I saw him, and it was slap bang in the middle of COVID. So it was the last time I saw him in person. I flew from California to England, and my brother had my parents fly from India to England, and we met there after an exorbitant 2-week quarantine. I was very strict because my parents were at older age at that point. And for years, for at least 10 years before that, I had been at him. "I want your story. I want your story. I want to write this book." And he would just wave me off and say, "I'm not ready. When I'm ready, then you can have my story." And there was always some excuse or the other. He wasn't happy in the last 10 years of his life after he sold his business to private equity, because his business was his life. It was his baby. It was all, this is not a man who plays golf and, chess and takes up retirement hobbies. So if he didn't have his business, he was sort of dreaming of how he could somehow get it back. And, we were all like, "Papa, I don't think you understand how private equity works." And he didn't. So when I saw him this last time, it was October 2020, again, like I had several times before, was like, "Papa, I want your story." And for some reason or the other, he just started talking. And I said, "Whoa, what's happening? Is this a sign from God?" And I started taping, and I ended up with somewhere between 14 and 16 hours of tape.
Wow.
Which was then my starting point for putting all this down in a book.
Yeah, that's wonderful that you were able to capture that and that he was open to it then. And he was a huge founder and business person at that time to capitalize, for lack of a better word, to get in an industry that almost every male would use. That was just brilliant. Now, do you think you talked earlier about you are moving into or have recently moved into the business of books, or just in the business of books? Do you see any parallels or relationships to your father's way of business and your new compared to when he started business of books and your new expression of business these days? Any connections, any parallels?
I mean, definitely there are a lot of parallels. Will I achieve the level of success with my books that he did with his product? I don't know. That remains to be seen. I certainly hope so. Since he passed away, and since I've been writing this book, and since I have been delving into the research, which has been a lot of interviewing his colleagues, mostly the ones that are still around, or family members, or the few friends that are left, they were all at older age. I have been discovering that of us 3 children, although the older 2, and I'm the youngest, were sort of male and definitely given preferential treatment vis-a-vis the family business. There's no place for females in a family business in my very traditional family set up in India. We're from Northern India. I think other families in other areas may be more progressive now, but not our family, and certainly not my dad. But of the three kids, when it comes to sort of values and working values and putting your heart and soul into the work that you do, I think I see so many similarities, just so many similarities. And maybe that is one reason why he and I just got along, especially at an older age, meaning once I grew up, so-called. As a child, I think he just didn't know what to do with me. I was this young kid. I was a little girl. Oh, that's for mom to sort of dress up and play. And, beyond sort of just being a delightful dad for a few minutes a day when he would come home from work, there was not a whole lot else. I really got to know him as an adult. And then I was already at a stage of my life where I didn't live at home with my parents. So I didn't get to see him that much, to be perfectly honest. So when I did the once, twice a year for that short amount of time, he would just stop everything and pour his heart and soul into spending that time with me. And the conversations we had weren't necessarily to do with his business. If anything, that was his avenue to actually escape. There was a lot of things about his business that, as a girl and an outsider, by that point, I was married already, so I'm outside the family technically. It just works differently, like I said, to other families. I wasn't privy to the information. So a lot of our conversations, it's not as if he wouldn't talk about anything else always. And it's not as if I was never allowed to talk about the business. Certainly that did happen a lot, but there were certain things that he just wouldn't let me into. So it was a departure, and he would intellectually engage on other topics that I've just never seen him do with any of the other family members. So I do see those values, just putting your heart and soul into work, really loving the work that you do to the point of, and I'm going to use the word obsession. That can go both ways, right? It can be positive and negative, right?
Yes.
To really, and this one is not, such a fun thing for me to say, but kind of being strapped for cash. The business of writing is not some lucrative, tech product, right? And my father, in building his business, although he had huge levels of success, especially later on, I think throughout his career, he was always strapped for cash. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. Because in the early days, there was little cash. Then once they started earning, it was always reinvested back into the business. You know that story. And then when you've got a situation where you're in India with a bureaucratic government and licenses and tax incentives and all of that stuff, it just gets worse and worse and worse. So, I do see that as well.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the one more thing I want to point out is, and this is a little bit of a different kind of comparison, but I think it's valid. My father always believed in building out a business that had a strong product, not a business with a weak product. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Shaving products, his blade, with the kind of precision technology with which it's made, punching the blade, sharpening the blade, getting the edge to sort of a certain angle, coating it with silicone, the kind of technology that goes into it is not something that the next person can sort of just pick up and do, Precision technology, you hear that kind of language when you talk about Mercedes-Benz, right?
Right.
And I remember at one point, relatively early in my career, I had a different kind of business. It was an Ayurvedic business, and I was making Ayurvedic products, but these are Ayurvedic oils. Ayurveda is the natural medicine from India. And my father was very, very dismissive. He says, "You're just mixing things. You're mixing things like a recipe in a kitchen. That is a weak business because the next person can walk into the kitchen and start mixing them too. And any amount of, well, that's my recipe versus somebody else's recipe, and my recipe has in it, he wouldn't agree with that at all. He said, no, that's a weak business because it has a weak product. My business has a strong product. The next person cannot come in and just craft the same thing. I have an edge because I have an expertise. I understand steel technology and alloyed steel and what to do with it. In the same way, words, anybody can write and everybody can write and nobody can write and very few people can write. Completely oxymoronic words that I am spouting here, right? So you make what you will of that. Anybody can write, sure, but can anybody write something that is compelling, gripping, a story that the next person wants to read, the book that you just cannot put down? That's a whole other thing, right?
Yes.
And I'm not suggesting that, oh, I am that person, but certainly it is a craft that comes from honing, just like you hone that razor blade. Over and over and over again. And you get better with each draft, and you get better with each book, and you get better with each product. And I've seen that along the way. So I think there's some kind of similarity there as well, even though our products are totally different.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Was there a defining moment that you decided that books are going to be my business? I know you cross industries and the type of work you've done, but it sounds like it's very intentional that books are the business. So was there a defining moment or a catalyst for that move?
I don't know if there was a specific catalyst or a specific defining moment. I have been writing in some way, shape, or form since the time I was a child. So, that standard question that you ask children, what would you like to be when you grow up? My answer was always, I want to be a writer. And it was several years actually before I became a writer of books specifically. I had written in journals and magazines and published this and that and the other. And then, of course, like I said, I had written for all of my various jobs. Storytelling sort of was what I was hired to do in a way in pretty much any job. So I'd worked in advertising. I'd had my own business. I'd worked as, a content developer. I became a journalist, print as well as broadcast. So storytelling, writing was very much happening. And it wasn't until I started working for public radio. I was in Hong Kong. I was a producer and a presenter of morning shows, which meant that I had to go to work at an insane hour of 3 or 4 in the morning. But my day would be done roughly by about 12 o'clock. So instead of coming home and sleeping like I should have been, I was itching to write something else that was non-work related. And that's when I had already actually written 2 books on the side with a previous job. And both of those were my initial books in Ayurveda. But that's when I then started writing my fiction. And I decided, you know what, I love writing books. And I love storytelling on my radio show as well, but I'm going to have to find a way to make storytelling my own business. It still took several years after that for it to happen. And it wasn't until mid-pandemic that I actually decided, as I mentioned earlier, to stop working a day job in order to focus on developing my IP full-time. And my IP, although it spans narrative fiction audio, as well as screenwriting, as well as book writing, just the way my head works is the story has to come through in book form first in order for me to have it make sense in any other form. So that might have been a pivotal moment. I will say now, 2.5 to 3 years after I stopped with my day job, I am now in a position where when I think of the business of my writing, I will think about the story, the kind of story. Is it fiction? Is it nonfiction? What kind of fiction? Is it fantasy? Is it young adult? Is it comedy? What kind of nonfiction? As I mentioned, Ace of Blades is a departure from my previous nonfiction books. And I will now think about what is the best medium or the best platform for this story to be brought to audiences. Is it a book? Is it audio? Is it film or TV? Is it something interactive on the web, which can combine all of the above?
Mhm.
And I am now thinking about that before I decide upon the best way to tell this story.
Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. This is fascinating. I love the way, and you mentioned early on, it's like evolving, but as you're walking us through it, it's fascinating to hear and I can only imagine what amazing things are going to come as we keep continuing in life and you continue in work. All right. So now this podcast, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, but the podcast is for what I call high achieving women. Now, this is how I describe high achieving women. Women who are ambitious, they're goal oriented, they are responsible at work, whether their work is on their own or for someone else. They're responsible at home in their personal life. They can do a couple things well. People come to them both in the work and at home. They're the go-to person for questions, and they're the one. And on top of all that, they've written at least one book. So this is who we're talking to today. This is who's listening to us right now. And with your wealth of experience and expertise, what's something you could share with the woman I just described, either from your professional life or your personal life? Because I thought, we're supporting other people. Who supports the one who's always supporting? So I thought we'd get on the podcast and talk to each other. So what do you say?
I'm so glad. Firstly, I'm so glad you mentioned we can support each other, because I will take and give. Give and take and exchange all the support. We all need it. Thank you for that, Dr. Robin. But I'm also really glad that you mentioned something. You said, we can all do a couple of things really well. I think that is key. Because all too often, what meets the eye is not what actually is. I get so many people who say to me, oh, you're doing so much. You're doing work and you take care of the family and you've got this project and you're that project. And it may seem like that, but honestly, if I were really doing like 10 things at the same time, I'd be paying more in therapy bills and ADHD medication than I know, because you can't do everything. And that is just the truth of life. And sometimes I'll get into trouble when I say that, because it sort of debunks somebody else's opinion of the high achieving woman. What do you mean, super mom and super career woman and head of the board on 3 other boards? And no, you can't do everything. You can't. And I full well have gotten into trouble myself. And so hence I speak from experience by trying to do too much at the same time because, quality lacks, right? So I always will tell my peers, don't try and do everything. Stick to one, stick to 2, but really do the best that you can at those things. Something's going to suffer because that's just life. And then don't bring yourself down for it. We all feel guilty. Women, we just feel guilty. If we're not guilty about home, then we're guilty about work. While we're at work, we're guilty about the baby at home. While we're with the kids, we're like, oh my gosh, my work and career suffering. You can't do everything at the same time. Whatever you are not focused on right now is not going away. It will be there. And sure, it is not always easy to leave things for a while and then go back to them and sort of then you've lost out because, your other colleagues progressed or, whatever the situation might be. But it's okay because you progressed in other areas of your life, right? So I think this is the one thing that I really want to share. I really want to talk about. And I know that so many women feel this way, but they're afraid to talk about it, right? But it's okay to A, talk about it, B, to acknowledge it, and C, to share it so that, our other peers don't feel like they're falling off the wagon either.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. All right. So now, the podcast is Leadership Purpose. Do you think it's important for you and or in general for people to have a sense of purpose in their work or purpose in their work? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
I think it's absolutely important, very, very important to have a sense of purpose, because what is life? And life is the macro here, and work may even be a micro. But what is life without purpose? Now, it's not that all of us know our purpose in life or at work or with my job, or am I on the right path with my career? And that's okay, because we're not born onto this planet just to know our true purpose. I mean, some of us who apparently do it. Wow, I wish I could be them when I grow up. But I think that is the purpose of being here in the first place, is to discover what your purpose is and then work towards it. Because otherwise you're just kind of wafting, and you will go career to career and hobby to hobby. And I'm not saying that's not fun. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do some of that. In fact, you have to do some of that in order to discover your purpose. But I like to think, and I like to believe, that by the time you have advanced to somewhat seniority in your life or career path or whatever it might be, some combination thereof, you have discovered your purpose so that you can also guide others who are looking for theirs, right? What is this community, these people, this network, this web, not just here, but, everywhere, right? Women, family, the United States of America, outside of that, in my case, India, Indian diaspora, that's pretty much everywhere. If we cannot go through this journey of looking for what I need to do, discovering what that is, working towards it in order to help others along the way as well. If that's not the purpose, then I don't know what is.
Yes, yes, yes. I'm resonating with everything you're saying. Reenita, you have been so gracious with your time and generous. Is there anything, before we tell people how they can get in touch with you and get your books, is there anything I didn't get a chance to ask you, or something that comes to mind now that you'd like to share before we tell people how to reach you?
Oh gosh, Dr. Robin, I could go on forever, but I think we've covered a lot of great stuff. Thank you. I do have 3 books in the works, so definitely look out for those. Rather than naming them and listing them off, of course, you can always find everything on my website and on my social media accounts when the time comes. So definitely stay tuned. And very exciting, some of my books are being turned into film. So those are very exciting projects that I am producing or co-producing or raising funds for, or some combination thereof. So if anybody is interested, I'd love to hear from you.
I want to say congratulations on that, because that's no easy feat. And you mentioned more than one, so you're really on your way. So congratulations. All right. So tell everyone, you mentioned they can reach you on social media. Tell them where they can specifically reach you.
So I am on all the usual social media, TikTok and Instagram. My handle is Reenita_storyteller. On Twitter, Reenymal, REENYMAL. LinkedIn and Facebook, my name, Reenita Malhotra Hora. And all of that can be much more easily found through my website, which is www.reenita.com, REENITA. I am very actively engaged with my followers, so subscription form is on page 1. Please do sign up, and I'd love to talk with you. And just lastly, I'll put out a quick plug for season 2 of my YA fantasy fiction podcast, Shadow Realm, which just released yesterday. So definitely look out for that. Details on my website.
Okay, that's fantastic. And we'll be sure to put all that in the show notes so people could reach out to you. Reenita, this has been fascinating. I can talk to you for a long time, but I know you have things that you're doing that we just mentioned earlier. And so just appreciate you for taking time out and sharing your wisdom with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Robin. It has been a pleasure.
Okay, everyone. And if you want to reach me, I'd love to hear your response to the episode. I'm on all social media, but I hang out mostly on LinkedIn. So if you go over and send a message in LinkedIn, I would love that. At Robin L. Owens, PhD, at Robin L. Owens, PhD. And if you have written a nonfiction book and you've been thinking about expanding your message beyond the book and thinking about maybe turning it into a course, but not quite sure if it's ready to be a course, I have a checklist for you that will help you know that your book is ready to be turned into a successful online course. Just head on over to createmasterfulcourses.com, createmasterfulcourses.com, and get your checklist there. And in the meantime, this is Dr. Robin. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. If you enjoyed it, head on over and rate and subscribe so you never miss an episode. New episodes drop every week, and I can't wait to hang out with you again soon. Meanwhile, this is Dr. Robin signing off. See you next time.